If you want to get a loan, you might try a peer-to-peer lending service like Prosper.com. What you do there is you go to the website and you post your loan request. I want $25,000. Then individual investors like you and me can go and fund a portion of that loan. Say, well, I'll loan you $1,000. And if enough people offer loan offers, then the loan will be funded. These markets have produced a lot of benefit for the borrowers who may not have a way to get a loan otherwise. They give them another way that they can get a loan. For investors who have money they want to invest, they can now invest in other people by lending them money and receiving the interest on those loans. In our research, we want to look at frictions that might prevent these markets from working as designed, that might prevent borrowers and investors from matching up. And the particular friction we looked at was political distance. The idea, for example, if you are an investor in, say, Oregon, considered to be a liberal-leaning blue state, and you're considering two roughly equivalent borrowers to lend to, one in Vermont, which is also typically liberal, and one in Alabama, which is typically conservative, would you be more likely to fund the borrower in, say, Vermont because they're more likely to match your political beliefs? So we tried to answer this question. We looked at data from 2006 to 2011 for Prosper.com when that market was first underway and those data were available. And we looked at who lended to whom. And what motivated this was a couple of rival hypotheses from the psychology literature. There's one called the prejudice gap hypothesis, which is that conservatives are more intolerant of liberals than vice versa. The rival hypothesis is called the ideological conflict hypothesis, and it states that conservatives are intolerant of liberals, and liberals are intolerant of conservatives, and of about the same amount, and so it kind of washes out. So we wanted to sort of explore this in the context of online lending, and what we found is that borrowers in more conservative-leaning states did consider political distance, that they were less likely to give loan offers to borrowers in more liberal-leaning states. We looked at the converse and found no evidence there that investors in liberal-leaning states did not consider political distance. They were not any more or less inclined to lend to other borrowers in liberal states or conservative states. It didn't matter. So we found this asymmetric effect whereby the distance, political distance mattered if the borrowers were for conservative states, but not if they were from more liberal states. And that was consistent with the prejudice gap hypothesis from the psychology literature. One of the tests we ran was looking at how the investors reacted to when the California Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in 2008. And what we found is that investors generally responded positively to that event by sending a few more loan offers to borrowers in California, with the exception of investors from much more conservative states, which is another way we found this asymmetric effect. Some additional nuance that we looked at was whether the political distance between the borrower and the pool of investors who had funded that loan affected the loan's performance, essentially whether the loan was repaid or not. And we found that it didn't. So the story was that the political distance between the investor and the borrower was affecting whether the loan got enough offers to be funded, but it didn't affect the performance of the loan once it was funded. Another result that we found that dovetails is we split the investors from the more conservative states into a less experienced and more experienced group. And for the more experienced group, the political distance effect was no longer there. That group did not consider the likely political distance between them and the borrower when making the decision to fund the loan or not. And the reason these two dovetail is we think that the reason that experienced investors stopped considering the likely political distance between them and the borrower is because they learned it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the outcome of the loan in terms of whether it's repaid or not. So the key takeaways from the research were that this exists in the market. We did find that there was this asymmetric effect that the investors from the more conservative states were less likely to lend to the borrowers from more liberal states. but that it didn't persist. It went away with experience, and we think that the lending markets, the Prosper.coms and others, can substitute that experience with education. So by educating the community around the factors that do influence whether a loan is going to be repaid, that'll prevent the market participants, the investors, from using factors that don't matter, like perceptions of political differences between borrowers and investors.